When I first started growing orchids, I thought they needed the most expensive soil and lights to blossom, and they died. That's when I realized that all they really needed was time and attention. You don't need to get your girl a gift. You need to give her your time.
And then all of a sudden you slowed down. It just seemed like you just stopped. Was it the fact that you had a problem with Def Jam? Was it the producers? Was you, with Rough Riders? What made DMX stop recording? And
y'all know the story already. You know what I'm saying? You used to be my dog. You was in my left titty. You know, screenwriter die. I thought you would die with me. You know, what happened was, like I said, I had the crazy track record, Def Jam. Everything was good. I go to do the 6th album, and
Jay-Z became president.
Over. Yeah. When he first got the job, he hit me with the call like, "Yo, dog, inmates is running the building." Like, "Yo, you good?"
Mm-hmm.
Finish the album, shoot the video. So what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go on vacation, and we don't know. What you mean you don't know?
Mm-hmm.
How do you listen to a whole album, pick a single, shoot a video, then don't know?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see what's really good. You're trying to eliminate the competition, because at first you retire, then get me off the label. Now you're back rapping again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sup, sobers?
So there's numerous artists over the course of time who have been true to themselves and have been very outspoken against this darkness that exists within the entertainment industry, as well as some of the secret costs that come with this superstardom. Of course, most of these people end up face down in a bathtub, but regardless. But it's very rare for someone to reach levels of fame and celebrity status, but yet they stay so true to themselves that you almost wonder whether they even know that they're famous or not. A few weeks ago, we talked about Aaron Hernandez from the New England Patriots, and his inability to graduate from his hometown lifestyles ultimately led to him making some serious mistakes and, unfortunately, his untimely ending. In that episode, I raised the question of, whether or not it's good for people at that level of fame and celebrity status to go back to their hometown and associate with some of the people that they might have been associating with before they got famous and blew up, because in some of those situations, those aren't necessarily the best people. Honestly, that's a super good episode, so if you haven't checked it out, you definitely should. It's very tragically interesting, and it highlights the dangers of that level of fame and still being involved with substances and crime. Another such story that makes us wonder whether, holding on to your roots as a celebrity is a good or a bad thing is the story of Earl Simmons. And I'm sure there's very few of you that actually know who Earl Simmons is, but I guarantee a lot of you guys will know who DMX is. Now, DMX was known for pretty much staying true to his roots and continuing to maintain his life on the streets back in Yonkers. He was one of the most notoriously famous rappers pretty much since Tupac and Biggie. Now, in classic form, with all of the allegations being thrown around about the music mogul Sean Puffy Combs and his longtime and business partner friend Sean Carter, aka Jay-Z, it's got netizens wondering what role, if any, did these two play in the ultimate downfall and untimely demise of the phenomenal, sensational rapper DMX, especially when you consider the history of how Puffy seems to have taken care of any sort of competition or how he seems to have handled his problems in the past. And consider this, DMX came swooping in to fill a void that was left in the wake of Tupac and Biggie being gone. What makes us think that Puffy or Jay-Z wouldn't do the same to him? Well, let's check it out. Welcome back to Sobering Stories with me, DJ Petrovsky, where we talk about addiction, substance use, and the crimes and the tragedies that they leave in their wake. There is one thing that I've learned on my sober quest up to this point, being sober for 5 years, and that's that accountability is amazingly important. It's honestly one of the first things that you have to master when you get sober. Most of the time, addicts are struggling alone, and the addiction continues to further isolate them from the people that they love and trust, which makes it harder and harder for you to be held accountable to yourself, to anybody else, and it makes it easier for you to continue slipping into that addiction issue. Sometimes opening up about your struggles can be difficult, but there is another way. there's a way that you can dip your toe into the pool and start holding yourself a little bit more accountable. And that way is through the Sunnyside app. This app is the perfect accountability buddy because it goes everywhere with you in your back pocket. And even more than that, it'll literally text you the next day to find out whether you upheld your goals or not. And it'll update the app, which will then update your progress. It tracks your drinking habits. It helps you set goals. It helps you cut back. And if you're looking to cut it out completely, then it'll design a plan so that it'll help you cut it out slowly or quickly, whatever time frame you're looking for. It's truly an amazing app. And not only that, but I ignored the app just to see like what it did, if it just was like, yeah, whatever. But no, it doesn't. If you do respond, then you'll get credit for it. But if you don't, well, then you failed that day. So the app encourages you not only to meet your goals, but also to use the app. And it has built-in features that are designed to actually keep up with you and make it easier than ever for you to stay on track with your drinking habits. Realizing as an addict that I could lie to pretty much everybody else, but the one person I couldn't lie to was myself, that was the first step in making positive changes for me. So if you've ever wanted to cut back or completely cut out any sort of substance out of your life, then give Sunnyside a try and use my link in the description. That'll get you a 30-day free trial as well as a discount on the yearly membership. So take that first step today. Click that link. And of course, with every free trial that's started, your boy does benefit, and it helps me keep bringing you guys amazing sobering stories each and every week. It's a good way for you to support the channel as well as support yourself in your own personal, mental, and emotional well-being. So give it a try. I'm sure DMX wishes he would have given it a try because Lord knows he had some struggles. Now, as many of you know, DMX actually lived a life that was as legendary and exciting as it was painful and tragic. But in light of all the recent allegations going on with the two Seans and with what happened with the loss of Pac and Biggie, it just made me want to dive a little bit deeper into what happened to what some would say is one of the last true representatives of the golden age of rap and hip hop. Now, when I was younger, I loved DMX. Like, I really loved DMX. He was one of my favorites, but also my mom did not think he was the best thing for me to be listening to for obvious reasons. So she would get me the clean, parental advisory, edited versions of those albums. And so it would sound a whole lot like this. All your mans has been to jail before, Mom. How the, you gonna cross my dogs on some bum, ain't that some? That's my DMX impression, edited version. Gotta love that parental advisory life, but props to my mom for even letting me listen to those albums in the first place because, well, I fell in love with DMX's hard style, but also the man spits truth. So I just appreciate that my mom was willing to let me listen to that, or maybe she just didn't even know what I was listening to. I don't know. I think one of the things that people liked the most about DMX when he first hit the scene real hard was how similar his flow, his style, his authenticity, and just the things he had to say really mimicked that of the late Tupac. He really did, kind of emulate. He almost even looked like Tupac. The two of them just had a similar flow. They had a similar vibe. They didn't ever wear their shirts. And so honestly, a lot of people thought this was the man who was going to fill that void and be bringing that hard street music that Tupac seemed to bring everybody.
Now, people compare you to Tupac. What do you think about that?
I don't think about that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think about it?
Nah, I do what I do. I'm going to go where I'm going to go. I'm going to be who I'm going to be.
Right.
Love it. Go take it. There was a void that he left open when he died. I don't fill that void, but I do feel part of that void because there was a hunger from the street that needs to be filled. You know what I'm saying? And I'm the ear of the street. I'm the mouth of the street. You know, I am the street. I'm the hood. I'm good till I'm good. I mean, I'm there. You know what I'm saying? I'm the voice of the people. So,
Excellent, brother.
I'm gonna be that.
But truly, if you compare these artists side by side, you'll see a lot of similarities between the two of them. And one of the similarities they shared was they both had beef with Puffy. Of course, DMX was a legend in the rap game, and he came into the scene real hot and real quick. And he, like I mentioned before, sort of filled that void left by Pac and Biggie, which made him intense competition for Bad Boy Records. And things really seemed to hit ahead for DMX when Jay-Z took over as the president of Def Jam Records. So it has a lot of people wondering if maybe the Seans had something to do with the downfall and ultimate demise of DMX. But one thing we know for sure contributed to DMX's downfall was his continued and persistent substance use, which started at the age of 14 and lasted all the way up until the end. There was periods of sobriety sprinkled in, periods of clarity sprinkled in here and there, but for the most part, he struggled from the time he was a teenager all the way up until the end. Though it seems his struggles were kind of just a side effect of his authenticity, there's one thing that's been widely understood about him, and that's that you can't truly understand this guy. You can't question him, and above everything else, he stayed true to himself all the way up until his last breath on April 9th, 2021. Earl Simmons was born in Mount Vernon, New York on December 18th, 1970, and his parents were Joe Barker and Annette Simmons, and they were only teenagers when they had his older sister and Earl. His father, Joe, was a watercolor painter who specialized in like Philadelphia street scenes. His work's pretty good actually, but he was always traveling and he was usually over in Philadelphia, so he actually wasn't around that often. And he was absent for Earl's life completely. The only time he'd ever really come around was when work would bring him into town. Earl was the middle child of 3. He had an older sister and a younger sister. And according to sources, he actually had 2 stillborn brothers, but they unfortunately didn't make it. As a young child, Earl struggled with bronchial asthma, and he also endured extended periods of abuse from his mom. She would just beat on him all the time. And eventually she would get so tired of him and so tired of the trouble that he was causing that she would send him to live with family in Yonkers, which is where he'd spend a lot of his childhood, just hanging out in the streets of Yonkers. And since he wasn't getting the love from his absent father and his abusive mother, it looks like he turned to try and find that love from the streets. At the age of 10, Earl actually got expelled from school. And at this point, his mom sent him to live at some group home, kind of like a place for troubled teens to get him back on track. But once he returned home, he would continue getting into trouble, and things got so bad that his mom just didn't seem to know what to do. And instead of trying to find a way to figure it out or show him love and figure out what his problems were, she just continued to abuse him worse and worse. And it got so bad, she actually took a broomstick to his face and knocked out a couple of his teeth at one point. I watched a ton of different interviews with X, and in almost every single one of them, when they do ask him about his childhood or his relationship with his mom and dad, he always kind of like takes a second, before he actually answers. And he never says really much of anything. He kind of tiptoes around the answer or tiptoes around the question, really. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like he doesn't really want to talk about it. It seems like a real traumatic part of his life. And the one thing he does say about it in multiple interviews is simply, there was just no love. No love there.
I used to get beat a lot of beatings.
Who was doing the beating?
My mother. If I did something wrong, her favorite thing was the extension cord. Well, she braided 3 of them together and would wait till I go to sleep. And she'd climb on my back, and just, I think that's why it's hard for me to sleep sometimes. I remember one time she beat me with the broom and knocked out like 2 teeth. I'd go to school, I couldn't sit down, but we had a rule. It was like whatever went on in the house, you keep it in the house.
And from your own mom, I think we hear this more often in terms of, dads being addicted to alcohol and hitting on their kids, and just dads are typically the ones that you hear about being abusive. So to hear that he was treated like this from his own mom, that had to be truly tragic and heartbreaking as a child, to not ever receive that kind of love from the one person who's supposed to love and appreciate and adore you more than anybody else. Now, X would spend his time living in and out of detention centers for getting into trouble, but when he wasn't in the detention centers, he'd basically be out living on the streets. Pretty much said that he would live in empty storage containers around the neighborhood of Yonkers, and he would make friends with all these stray dogs in the neighborhood, which seems to be where he developed his affinity and his love for dogs. Like the one thing in this world that seemed to show him love was these stray dogs. Probably heavily related with these dogs, dogs that nobody wanted. He kind of felt the same way, like he was just a stray that nobody wanted, and they all grew up and lived on the streets. Now, X really wanted to get involved with like sports or some sort of extracurriculars at school, but because of his grades, he just wasn't allowed to. He couldn't keep his grades up to be able to do those things. And those are pretty notorious things that are supposed to keep kids out of trouble. So unfortunately, what's he really left to do? The one thing that X did seem to occupy his time with and did really seem to develop an affinity for was music. And he kind of got his kickstart into the music industry at the age of 14 when he started beatboxing for this local rapper named Reddy Ron. Now, not only was Reddy Ron his introduction into music, but it was also his introduction into the dark world of addiction. He says that at some point, Reddy Ron passed him this joint that was laced with some Frosted Flakes, and the rest is history. And this is just at 14 years old. In the world of music at this time, there was a really popular drum machine called the Oberheim DMX. And since X was a basically a drum machine for Ready Ron. He thought that would be a good name for him as like his beatboxing sidekick. Originally, he came up with the name thinking that the DMX would mean Divine Master of the Unknown. As Ready Ron continued to rise in success, he realized, like, I want to do my own thing. I don't want to be stuck underneath Ready Ron this whole time. It wasn't until he found himself in jail for Grand Theft Auto when X would really start to hone in on his craft. He would do rap battles with other inmates. He would write. He would think about different flows and different styles that he could start working on, and just really honed in on his craft, his rap craft, while he was in jail, utilizing the most of his time. Around the same time period, it said that he changed the name from Divine Mystery of the Unknown to simply just Dark Man X. Because, I mean, he really is a mysteriously dark, relatively unknown. You just can't figure this guy out. He's an enigma.
What does the DMX stand for, brother?
Dark Man X.
Dark Man X.
Yeah, X is unknown. You know what I mean?
Once he got out, he started working really, really hard, releasing tons of mixtapes and just gaining more notoriety with his signature raspy voice and aggressive style. And him and this artist K Solo actually became really well known during this time for a new style that they had kind of worked up called spellbound rapping. And basically it's just a style where you kind of like spell out the words that you're rhyming instead of just rapping the words themselves. Kind of like PETROVSKI coming at you with the getting not high. I'm not a rapper. But between the two of them, they would produce tons of singles using this style. They would engage in rap battles. And there was this intense competition between the two of them because they both thought they could do this style better than the other one. And this is where DMX really started getting his name spread around the industry. By 1991, he'd be scooped up by a relatively unknown record label at the time called Rough Riders, and that was just a management contract for him. And then later on, he would be signed underneath a subsidiary label underneath Columbia Records, which is where he'd release his debut single, Born Loser. Unfortunately for X, the track was not a huge success, and he was subsequently let go from the label in 1993. This would leave X as kind of like a free agent, independent artist, looking for a label, a place where he could call his home so he could start releasing music, making albums, and just start working on making himself a little bit more well-known. In 1994, Suge Knight with Death Row Records actually was looking to sign DMX underneath some sort of joint venture with Rough Riders. In my opinion, that would have been absolutely sick because Death Row was the home of Tupac Shakur, and having DMX and Tupac, that would have been the collab of the century. I swear, those guys would have tore up the whole industry. So I'm surprised they honestly didn't sign him, but they didn't. Another label that was a potential signer for DMX at the time was good old Bad Boy Entertainment with our boy Sean P. Diddy Puff Daddy Brother Love Combs. The one thing that DMX says about this whole experience is that he at least respects Puffy because he shot him straight, you know? He didn't beat around the bush. He just told him exactly what his issue was. He basically says, I don't like his voice and he's really not marketable. So, nah, I don't think I want to sign him. And basically just tells DMX, no thanks.
D was like, yo, if you like the Lox, like X is like big dog, like those are the pups, like you look. And you know, I respected my pup. He told me to my face. It's like, you know, his voice is too rough, he's not marketable. I mean, what are you gonna do with that? Like you gotta respect that. Like, you're gonna be mad, like, what do you mean? You know, like, fuck, he told the truth. Okay, cool. But when the deals got on the table, he came back like, yo, I'll double whatever they gave you and I'll lace your pockets. I'm cool, homie. If you didn't know what I was then, you just pretty much jump on the bandwagon now. Like you don't know, like you still clueless on who I am or how to fuck with me. So like you supposed to see that diamond shining a long time ago. Like, you know, if you really that nigga, you supposed to see it like, oh wait a minute, that's a diamond.
And DMX kind of talks about how he didn't really want to be signed to Bad Boy anyways, just really not his vibe. And if you really think about it, it's really not his vibe. Bad Boy, even though it's named Bad Boy, it's really not so much of a Bad Boy label. And there's definitely a better home for DMX somewhere else. However, there is a lot of speculation nowadays with all the news coming out about Puffy, just saying that the real reason he passed up on DMX was really because he just wasn't controllable, he wasn't attractive, and clearly was not the kind of guy that Diddy was going to be able to get underneath him. So, of course he passed him up. He didn't fit the mold of what Diddy was looking for. But like I said before, DMX says he just really respected Puffy for shooting him straight like that. But DMX is very, very outspoken talking a lot of trash about the notorious industry and just the weird things that you have to do to be successful in the industry.
Well, I don't want to play this. When you see them outside or at a party, they straight sucking dick. You know, oh, what up, my man? Yeah, how's it doing? Get the fuck out of here, man. You know what I'm saying? Niggas is suckers, man. The game is bullshit, man. The game is fucking bullshit. If you want to rap or sing or whatever, don't become a part of the game. You know what? Listen to a song I called The Industry. And that pretty much explains, you know what I'm saying, what the shit is about. The industry. Man, it's not the same. The industry, it's not a fucking game. The industry, real niggas is dying to get in. The industry, just to find they don't fit in. The industry ain't what it used to be. The industry's trying to control the way you MC. They want you to dress like this and talk like that. But I'm going to dress like this and talk with the gat. The industry got y'all word meaning nothing. The industry, fuck what you heard, because he's bluffing. The industry, money, bitches, hate, but I dare you to try to take a fucking thing off my plate. The industry like, wait, but in the streets, we like, get him. 17 up in that thing, catch him sleeping, hit him. My pop whoever's with him. The coroner's coming to get him. Industry, that's why I did him. I mean,
most of the time he's vague about who he's talking about. He doesn't call anybody out by name, but I think with everything going on with the music industry these days, I think we can only assume we know who he's talking about. But shoot, he could honestly be talking about anybody at this point. Ironically enough, DMX would actually get picked up by Rough Riders again. But at this point, Rough Riders had grown a little bit, and they'd partnered with Def Jam Records. And Def Jam was a much more solidified, well-known label at that time. But they were starting to have trouble maintaining themselves because they just didn't have the artists that other labels had at that point in time. And the whole record label thing can get extremely confusing because one label is like partnered with another label, and some artists are managed by one label but signed to another label for publishing. Some labels will start but then change names and then get bought out by another label who's actually owned by a bigger parent company, and then that parent company actually is owned by another parent company, and it just gets really confusing. So I understand there's a lot to keep track of. But essentially, it was Rough Riders that was in charge of producing the albums and making the music with DMX. And Def Jam would utilize their superior distribution network so that they could actually market and pump out these albums and actually, mass produce these things and get it to a bigger, wider audience. So they just kind of utilize their strengths and their weaknesses and combine forces in order to help the artist out and make the most money, really. X would hit the scene hard. He would drop his first album titled It's Dark and Hell is Hot, and it would debut at #1 on the Billboard Top 200 list, which is phenomenal for your first album especially. This album hit gold status, and because of that, there was pressure from executives at Def Jam, like Liar Cohen, who were telling X, you need to get another album out as quick as you possibly can. And he did. In fact, he produced his second album, Flesh of My Flesh and Blood of My Blood, which also debuted at #1 on the Billboard Top 200 list. And that would make him the first rapper to achieve 2 gold #1 ranked albums in the same year. Pretty crazy. In fact, X would release 5 straight studio albums that would all hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 200 list, and all would do amazingly well. And this is probably one of the reasons why Def Jam even survived this time period, because signing DMX really boosted that label up so much, especially during this time when they were trying to diversify their artist group. They were starting to focus on other music outside of hip-hop. So Def Jam seemed to really be trying to figure itself out during this time period, and DMX really was a staple that held this company together. X had signed to Rough Riders underneath Def Jam and released his first album by 1998. At the same time that he signed with Rough Riders and Def Jam, Jay-Z also was hitting the scene pretty hard, and he actually got signed underneath Def Jam as well. He made a partnership agreement with his label Roc Nation, kind of sold half of Roc Nation to Def Jam, with an agreement that they would produce his music and then use their superior distribution network to pump his music out as well. At the same time that X released his first album, Jay-Z released his first album, In My Lifetime Volume 1, which dropped in 1997. Just a couple years prior, in 1995, Ja Rule, Jay-Z, and DMX were actually all brought in by Irv Gotti to be in this super group called Murder Inc. And they actually made 6 songs together, but because of just personal differences and issues with the labels, their independent labels, they ended up breaking up this group and nothing really came of it. That was kind of the spark of this whole rap beef between Ja Rule, Jay-Z, and DMX. And then with Jay-Z and DMX now working on the same label, touring together, things like that, the beef just continued to grow. But despite all this beef, there was this unspoken love and respect that was perfectly represented when Jay-Z actually boycotted the Grammys for the first of many times in 1998 because DMX was completely passed up even being nominated for Best Rap Album of the Year, and Jay-Z actually won Best Rap Album of the Year, but he didn't even show up to accept the award. And he says in later interviews that the reason he did that was because he didn't think it was fair that X didn't even get nominated, and he had 2 #1 selling albums in that same year, but Jay-Z only had the 1 top charting album, so he just didn't feel like it was fair, and so he boycotted it. He would go on to boycott many Grammy Awards, and he would also go on to win 24 more Best Album of the Year, blah, blah, other Grammy Awards. So not really that big of a deal, but at that time he didn't know he was going to win all these awards. So it was kind of a big deal for him to skip out on his very first Grammy Award-winning Album of the Year. Jay-Z himself recalls the beef and the competitive nature between the two of them, and he even talks about how DMX was one of the main reasons that he started to rethink and kind of redesign his entire live performance, because X would come out and do the dog growl and just hyped up the crowd, and he just was such an amazing live performer that it made Jay-Z realize he needed to step his game up to try and keep up with it.
Me, DMX, Method Man, Redman, Ja, the Lox, this tour is packed. First night, 360 sold out. Everyone has a great show. Meth and Red are flying in the audience. They're incredible performers. Everyone's destroying it. So X is about to go on, and I'm like, you know, I want to see. I got like
X is before you.
X is going before me. The lights are up. He's in the hallway. It goes doom doom. Yeah. And now the arena's shaking, and I'm like, this is cool. And then it goes doom doom, and then he goes, and the arena goes crazy. First of all, it's deafening, and I'm like, oh shit. He's running back and forth. He has a thing like an Alizé and Hennessy mix. It looks like blood. It's like he's drinking blood, right? And he's running back and forth. 1, 2, 1, 2. Here he goes, 1, 2. And going halfway through the show, then he takes his shirt off. All the girls are screaming, ah!
And the dog chain.
Yeah, the dog chain is tripping and he's going nuts, right? And I'm like, shit. This is halfway through. Now first the guys are going crazy. Now the girls are going crazy. And then he gets to the end and he starts a prayer.
Oh my God.
And now they're crying.
Yeah.
The whole arena is crying. Yeah. They're crying tears. And I'm like, they're like, hey, now you go. And I had Hard Knock Life on, so it was like, it's a hard knock life. Put your hands up, people. Everybody finished the show that night. Everybody's happy, by the way. And I was like, we got 56 dates of this shit? And I was like, but I had to figure, I'm like, okay, I have to figure out my space in this. Yes. You know, I have to figure out where do I exist? And I was like, in my opinion, in my mind, this is what I believe. I was like, he can't rap better than me. So on that tour was the most acapellas ever. Everything was, cut the music off. I'm the dookie.
And it was just this constant back and forth between the two of them. They would even do rap battles behind the scenes, you know, backstage.
I'm strong all day, socks blowing, sweatpants pockets bulging, holding it down on the corner of my block posing. My spot falling, drops the price of the coaching, throw the competition out, let the dough flow in. Cops is closing in. I could do the time, but what's really on my mind ain't no holes in the pants. I play the low end, try to make it hard to find me. The Fed still trying to build the case since '93. Bring it back, bring it back. Bring it back. You already know them. Around. Yeah. That was
back in the pool room again.
Yo, moves is made. This is paid. That's just how it is. When my time is up, I'm gonna be out with it. I'm gonna try to live. I mean, day by day. Ain't nothing sweet about it. Act like you don't know what I'm saying? You read about it. Built for war like an armadillo. Smother your ass with two through the pillow. My shit is brilliant. Manic depressive and my head hurts. No, give me your dough and your hoe in here. Take these phone. Hot things, I got things that make niggas spin. Put niggas in the wind where you never see niggas again. I bless a nigga with stitches with thin tight. And a straight razor will put pinstripe across your windpipe.
It just seemed like the two of them were in constant competition. Now, on top of this, DMX also had some label drama stuff go on with a group called the Lox. And if you haven't heard of the Lox, it's a trio of 3 guys, Chic Louch, Jadakiss, and Styles P. They were kind of up-and-coming rappers as well, and they actually signed to Bad Boy Entertainment. But throughout their journey, learning and just kind of finding who they are and what direction they wanted to head as a group, they realized that they had kind of a harder style, and their style didn't really mesh with the Bad Boys R&B style that they were kind of going with, especially after the loss of Biggie. Like, their whole rap game kind of just seemed to turn more R&B in terms of Bad Boy Entertainment. And so the Lox wanted to get out of this contract that they had where they were signed underneath Bad Boy, and they wanted to sign underneath Rough Riders, which was the home of DMX. But Puffy would not let the Lox out of this agreement. He refused to let them have their publishing rights, and he refused to release them from the label. It got so bad that members of the Lox would actually wear Free the Lox shirts at all their shows. There was like this whole movement of Free the Lox, like get these guys out from under this label. And if that wasn't a red flag already as to the kind of treatment that Puffy gave to his artists and just how greedy and, I don't know, just how much control he seemed to exert over his artists, I don't know how we missed this stuff. Of course, hindsight is 20/20, but still, like, why would anybody want to sign to an artist when you realize that you may not be able to get out from under this artist, literally and figuratively? Eventually, Puff would agree to release the Lox from the label, but he would retain all of the publishing rights, which just showcases the intense amounts of greed, the power-hungry nature of the music mogul early in his career, and just how the music industry as a whole just treats the artists that literally make them who they are.
Well, you know, Lox got signed before I did. Even though I bought the Lox Go Orchids, you know, they got signed. They were a safer group. You know, Puff signed them. And it was a blessing and a curse because they were sure they were happy about getting signed first, and they were on the Benjamins and shit was going. But they made them jiggy and put them in suits and made them write lyrics for them and took all their publishing and them. Like, damn. I'm glad I didn't, you know, like, you keep that.
Once the Lox decided to leave Bad Boy, they signed over to Rough Riders, which is really where a lot of people feel like there might have been some serious beef between DMX and Diddy. So then when the Lox now leaves Diddy and goes over and signs with DMX's label Rough Riders, it just seems like the beef got a lot more intense at this point. And this is the part of the story that really caught my attention, because this is when the Shawns start to be a little bit more influential at both of their music labels. They're on their big rise to power, and you can start to see this beef forming between these two music moguls and DMX, and it just makes you wonder what was going on around this time period between all these different labels, especially knowing how outspoken and just raw DMX was about everything. He didn't hold back anything. One of the main things giving more credibility to this fact is that L.A. Reid actually was trying to diversify Def Jam, but he still wanted somebody who understood the hip-hop world to kind of take over that and run the hip-hop sector of Def Jam. So he had appointed Jay-Z to be the new president of Def Jam Records to run the hip-hop side of things. When he took over, there seemed to be this kind of like, you know, when you're working with your friend and then they become your boss, it just creates some weird tension. That's kind of how DMX felt with this whole thing. He was like, man, it just felt like we were homies. Prisoners got the keys to the building. So it just seemed like everything was going to be up for DMX. But instead of boosting up his boy, something went wrong.
You know, when he first got the job, he hit me with the call like, yo, dog, MH is running the building. Like, yo, you good? Finish the album, shoot the video. What happened? Let's go on vacation and, you know, we don't know. What you mean you don't know? How do you listen to a whole album, pick a single, shoot a video, then don't know? Okay, I see what's really good. You're trying to eliminate the competition. You know, because at first you retire, you know, then get me off the label, now you're back rapping again. Okay.
Now, Jay-Z had already sold half of Roc Nation, or partnered half of his company with Def Jam. So when he took over as president, he just fully fused Roc Nation into Def Jam and sold pretty much the whole company over to them. And that started in 2004 and lasted until 2007. In 2007, Jay-Z actually decides he's not going to renew his contract with the label, and he actually pieces out and decides to focus exclusively on Roc Nation at this point, doing his own thing. He's like, I already did it. There was too many limitations running Def Jam with all the higher-ups and executives. I want to do my own thing. Likely he saw the success that his buddy Diddy was having running his own thing, doing Bad Boy. But DMX has always been hugely outspoken, saying that Jay-Z basically eliminated him from the label during his short stint running Def Jam. DMX had just recorded his 5th album, dropped it, hits #1 on the charts. He said it makes them $144 million, of which he saw $0.
Yeah, I'm trying to form a union, you know what I'm saying? Because there's no one who protects the artist, the rights of the artist, and we continue to get jerked, you know what I'm saying? We pay for our fucking music, but the record company owns it. What type of back with that shit? That's like getting a loan from the bank for a house, and when you're paying back, they still own the house. That shit is not fair, you know what I'm saying? And the percentage that they give you isn't fair, you know what I'm saying? The split is ridiculous. The highest paid rap artist gets maybe 18 to 23 cents off a dollar. What the type of shit is that, man? I'm not a slave, man.
Then on top of that, he started working on his 6th album with Def Jam, but that's when trouble kind of started. He said he recorded the full album, worked on a bunch of singles, and was getting a bunch of videos ready for the promotion for the album. And then he said everybody just kind of went on vacation and nobody cared about his album. Nobody gave any sort of promotion to it. Nobody really pushed it. And then that's when they decided that they were actually going to let DMX go from the label completely. DMX and many others have always felt that this was Jay-Z's attempt at basically eliminating the competition. And it makes sense because he was in a position of power now over X and basically was running the company. And with friends like Diddy, who knows what kind of things were going on behind closed doors, what kind of plans there were to eliminate any competition that there was. And Jay-Z was really only in this whole president role for a short 3 years. And like DMX mentions in this video, he went right back to rapping as soon as he got off that label. So he got the competition out of the way and then goes back to rapping. Just feels a little sinister if you ask me. Now, sources say that Jay-Z essentially asked X to leave the label. And it seems like X agreed to this, but he had one stipulation, and that was that they take on Nas onto Def Jam. And so they agreed to this, brought Nas on, and he left Def Jam, and that would leave him to be an independent artist again, right in the middle of making his 6th album. Now from here, X decided to partner up with a new label. He went to Columbia Records, and because of all the changes in labels and all the craziness, he was expected to release his 6th album a whole lot sooner, but with multiple delays and everything else, he finally got his 6th album released, and it did not get received the same way the other 5 albums did. It did not reach #1, and it did not perform as well as really anybody thought. So that was kind of a huge blow to X and to his career, honestly. This would kind of mark the start of a downward spiral for X. But like I mentioned before, with X out of the way, Jay-Z went back to rapping, and he actually left the president role from Def Jam. And if you guys listen to my Kim Porter case, then we're going to bring in a character we've talked about before, and that is Shakir Stewart. And you may know from that episode that Shakir actually took over running the hip-hop side of Def Jam after Jay-Z left the company and decided to go back out, start rapping again, and do his own thing with Roc Nation. So, very interesting, because as many of you know, Shakir Stewart had beef with Diddy as well, because he dated Kim Porter for a short period while they had been broken up. And some of you may remember from that episode that Shakir Stewart was found under some pretty peculiar circumstances as well, having, done himself in. With all the numerous accounts of the extreme lengths that the Shans would go to just to maintain their status and their power and continue to grow and rise in the music industry, just raised a whole bunch of red flags for me in terms of what would follow with the DMX saga. Over the years, DMX would be in and out of jail pretty frequently. In fact, he was in and out of jail or charged with a new crime nearly every single year since he was 14 years old. He started out with small, petty theft, petty crimes just to make some money here and there. Then he would graduate to more serious crimes, stealing cars, substance-related crimes, weapon-related crimes. It would really hit a head and start to get much worse after being let go from Def Jam and with the lack of success with his 6th album. Now, I was going to go through all of DMX's charges. Initially, I had planned to do that, but when I saw how many there were, I was like, yeah, nobody got time for that. I don't know, I'll just kind of go through a few of them. It's not super important, but if you're interested, go to Wikipedia. Every single charge is on there, And yeah, you can get a good detailed description. But essentially, he was charged with multiple different crimes: tax evasion, substance, weapons crimes. Anytime he would get arrested, they would come to his house. They would see that he had like 10 to 12 dogs, upwards of 15 dogs at any given time. So they would charge him with animal cruelty for just having too many animals in a living space. He had a $400,000 failure to pay child support charge. That's crazy. He had tons of driving offenses. He had DUIs, driving without a license, driving while license suspended, tons of different charges. And none of those ever deterred him from continuing to do what he did. I listened to an interview, and one of the rappers from the Lox actually talks about how he saw DMX actively rob a person with his dog and then used that experience in one of his raps. But one of the absolute best stories, in my opinion, of DMX getting charged with something is when he was actually charged for impersonating an FBI agent. And he says that this guy was just driving too slow when he was on his way to the airport, and he had like a light and a PA system in his blacked out supercharger, and he decided that he was just going to pull this guy over. And so he pulls this guy over, and then in the midst of everything, somebody else realizes that he's antagonizing this guy and calls the police, says he's impersonating an officer, and starts this whole fiasco. It's kind of a wild situation, kind of hilarious in my opinion.
Light on.
Yeah, I threw the light on.
So you just have sirens in your car?
Well, that one, yeah. That one, yeah.
I think that made you feel like you had more authority than you actually had.
I had a supercharger there. It was all blacked out. I had the lights, the siren, the PA system. Authority. Damn right I had authority.
Now, you don't think the guy was like, that's DMX?
No, he didn't see me at first. I saw him. The windows were tinted, everything. So then I just ran around, I pulled him, cut him off, jumped out the car, like, yo. All right, I might have asked for his license. I don't remember. I might have asked for his license. You know. Oh, man. And then the lady, the lady in the parking lot that be driving around in the golf cart at the airport. I was like, yo, call the police on this dude. You know what I'm saying? I might have said, something to the effect that
I am the police.
Yeah, something like that.
All this while you're rushing to catch a flight, but you have time to stop somebody, pull them over, get their license.
You know what? Because anger gets the best of me sometimes.
Oh, okay.
And when I get angry to a certain point, nothing else matters.
But it just shows how his crimes continued to escalate. He clearly didn't care at all. 0 Fs given. It led many to wonder why such a monumental, legendary rapper, such a huge success story, would just continue going back to his life on the streets. It's like, did he even realize that he was a celebrity? Did he even realize he was famous? Yeah, he did. He just did not care. 0 bucks. Literally, he was as known for his music as he was for being a tabloid sensation, constantly being in and out of jail. But it was this same ideology that made me think of the Aaron Hernandez case, because just like Aaron Hernandez, DMX would return when he wasn't touring or making any albums, and he would live in his hometown. He would hang out with his crew in Yonkers. He would engage in the same criminal activities he would always engage in. He would use the same substances, hang out with the same people. Just like Aaron Hernandez, it continued to lead to a life of crime, a life of substance abuse, and he just didn't seem to be able to escape it. It's like he never wanted to grow out of it. The other piece of that is, just like Aaron Hernandez, they both experienced serious trauma from being abused by their parents at a very young age, which led to them abusing substances at a very young age. And it's said that when you abuse substances that early in life, that it makes it way, way harder for you to actually get out of that substance abuse or that addiction. And it makes it way more likely that you are actually going to fall into an addiction with that substance or something else. With both the Aaron Hernandez story, with this story, the boozing barber story that I had talked about, one of my very first stories, that guy actually took people out, like unalived them with alcohol. Pretty crazy. But just like all of these stories, they all started using substances at a very young age, in their early years, 10 to 15 years old. And I also started using alcohol at 12 years old, and I feel like it's one of those things that is so true. The earlier you use it, the more likely you are to develop this reliance on it, because you're replacing coping skills, you're replacing your coping mechanisms with this substance early on in life, and then you never learn how to cope with things. All of those stories are really good stories, by the way. You should check them out. They're in my playlist. One thing you can't deny about DMX is the sheer raw authenticity of this man. He is as hard as they come, yet he wears his heart on his sleeve. He's such a religious person, yet at the same time, he's in and out of jail. Like, he's just such a raw, authentic individual.
You refer to God and curse in the same lyrics and the same song.
No,
what
no,
exactly?
not in the same song. On the same album.
On the same album. So do you feel that sends a mixed message or not?
It's a mixture of good and bad.
Okay.
So I'm gonna give it to him real.
All right.
And as long as you give it to him real, it's up to the individual to make the right decision. It's not good or bad, it's real.
And a lot of people would say that his really tough upbringing and all of the different abuse that he endured, it's what really led him to continue down this path of crime and to not be able to let go of the streets. But if you really think about it, the same thing could be said for why he was so successful. He was speaking from the heart. He had this experience that people could relate to of being from the streets and having a rough upbringing, and he just was so relatable to people, and he was so raw about how he delivered that message. But you could honestly argue that if he didn't have such a rough upbringing, maybe he wouldn't have turned into DMX. Now, though X was super tough on the exterior, I saw multiple interviews where he was just super emotional, wearing his heart on his sleeve.
Are there people you can be vulnerable with? That you can be really honest?
Yeah,
really be honest.
Yeah.
Because it seems like, I mean, you seem like actually a sensitive guy. Inside somewhere. Earl's a sensitive guy. Don't tell anybody. But I mean, you seem.
I mean, there are times. You know, like I said, I'm human.
Because I see stuff flash. You flashes past.
I see a lot of flashing going on.
Yeah, and if you get off that, you get
Maybe
off.
I need a mirror or something.
The guy was as genuine as they come, and literally anybody that had the pleasure of knowing him personally said that he just exhibited so much love. He was just such a loving, caring, kind individual, even though he had this super just aggressive persona. Outside of music, X loved to fish. He loved to hang out with his 15 freaking kids. The dude had 15 kids. And he was just a super loving guy. And that's why he always spent all of his time back in Yonkers. He just loved his people. He loved the people he grew up with. And he wanted to do as much as he possibly could to help out that community. And it's so beautiful. I love to see that. One could argue that it could have been his downfall, but at the same time, that was him staying true to himself, to his roots, to the people that he grew up with that helped make him who he was. I feel like DMX represents the purest and most tragic form of addiction. He was able to make so much of himself, but he was never able to fully break free of those shackles holding him back. And likely it stemmed from being unloved as a child and then just following this path through life where he never really knew how to receive love from people. He never really learned how to cope, not as an adult, not as a child. He just never learned it. And as he grew older, it was unfortunately something that he would continue to struggle with all the way up until the day he passed. Now, with all the mounting legal troubles, X was having a really hard time staying afloat, keeping his head in the game. He would really only experience periods of sobriety when he was incarcerated, and which seemed to be pretty often. His list of charges got exponentially larger after he was released from Def Jam. He just had more issues. He didn't have the same monumental celebrity fame status. He wasn't making as much money. It said that he actually had to file for bankruptcy multiple times. And when he got arrested for tax evasion, for evading taxes from 2010 to 2015, he actually had to pay back all of that money, which pretty much left him broke. Now, X experienced what most addicts experience, which is multiple lapses, relapses, moments of clarity, moments of sobriety, intervention from his son and family members. He experienced all of the things that an addict would typically go through. And just like most addicts, the path to sobriety is not linear. It is certainly not a switch that you just flip and then suddenly you're just sober. It is a journey, and it does involve some failure sometimes. It does involve struggle sometimes. And DMX, it seemed like he was constantly trying to get there, but he was never able to finally hold it down and maintain once he was there. He would do outreaches with kids. He would go out into impoverished neighborhoods. He did this episode on Dr. Drew where he reached out to a really troubled teen. So he did his part to try and give back and steer kids away from the same path that he was on, but he just couldn't kick it himself. The extent of his addiction became very apparent in 2016 when he actually fell in a parking lot after being seen by an eyewitness consuming some sort of white powder. And then he fell in this parking lot, was unconscious, and they had to call an ambulance to resuscitate him.
DMX is in the hospital after he was found unconscious in a hotel parking lot. This time, the reason for the rapper's hospitalization is still unconfirmed.
I walked out to the car, my heart stopped. People talk about out-of-body experience. I remember seeing the police officers working on me.
and they were successful. He was able to come back to life, but I think it scared X a little bit, and it also woke up the entire world to how serious his substance abuse problem was actually getting. He would return to rehab in 2017, but at the same time, he would actually be arrested for tax evasion for not paying taxes from 2010 until 2015. He made $2.3 million during this time period. The government's going to care about that, X. Initially following the arrest, he was allowed to be out on bond, but because he violated terms of his probation, he was picked up again and he was housed in jail in January of 2018 until his actual trial date in March of 2018. After this, he was sentenced to a year in federal prison, and he was also ordered to pay back the taxes that he skipped out on paying, which pretty much left him broke. Despite all of this going on, X continued to make music when he wasn't incarcerated, you know. He would go on to release one more studio album and a number of singles, and then in his time when he wasn't incarcerated, he would actually be touring. In 2019, in order to release his 8th studio album, he had signed again back with Def Jam Records, but obviously at this point it was managed by different people, and he had plans to release the album in 2021. And there's actually an HBO documentary that I watched that was really good. I'd recommend it if you're interested. But it just documents his last year, essentially, of his life, touring and making this album and just documenting basically DMX in his last year of his life. In the documentary, he fails to show up for some interview they were going to do, and everybody's kind of freaking out. They don't know where he's at, they don't know what he's doing, and they can't get a hold of him. He disappears for a pretty extended period of time before he finally just randomly turns back up, admits himself back into a rehab facility, and is trying to get clean again and get focused again and get back on track with things. And things seem good for a little while, but unfortunately, X would relapse one final time on April 2nd, 2021, and this overdose would lead to him having a serious heart attack, which left him in the hospital in pretty much a vegetative state. When the toxicology report came back, it obviously showed crickety crack. There was some of that Fenty in there, which is likely what caused the overdose because that stuff started sneaking into everything, and that started taking everybody away. There was other prescription medications, alcohol. On top of everything else, he had contracted COVID-19. So even if he was able to kind of work through it, it had constricted his lungs so much that it was just even more damaging at the time. His family kept him on life support for about 7 days, but after that, they really had to make a hard decision, and they decided to pull the plug. And on April 9th, 2021, DMX will have left us, and the dog would bark no more. The news of his passing would literally shock the entire world. People were expecting this new album. He was just touring. He had this documentary coming out. Everything seemed like it was going so well. And then just like that, he was gone. Earl's life dream was actually to continue making music, but in jail, he always wanted to come out and be a pastor.
I'm going to give my first sermon in the church. That's going to be like incredible for me, and I hope it'll be incredible for the congregation of that church. You know, I hope I'm able to reach somebody or just touch somebody, you know what I'm saying, and bring them closer to the Lord.
And he talked about this many times. He wanted to finish up, retire, continue working on music on the side, but he wanted his main focus to be a pastor. And if you kind of think about it, all of his albums include a prayer and some sort of gospel song in there, and he's extremely religious. He's always talking about God and his plan and his love, and some of the stuff he talks about is truly beautiful and poetic. I've even got this cool video of him doing this prayer with Diddy, and it kind of does it on the spot. He doesn't even seem like he knows he's doing it.
Quiet, let's go. Quiet in the building, quiet in the building.
Wow, man. Father God, we thank you for this gathering of souls. The word says that when two or more gather in your name, that you are present, so we thank you for your presence. We ask that your grace and blessings are upon the show this evening. Pray that any obstacle the devil plans to place in our path be removed in the name of Jesus. We pray that there are no fightings, no stabbings, no shootings, no arrests, no drunk driving, no altercations or incidents whatsoever. We're able to touch one person for your name's sake, for your glory. And we've done something wonderful in our lives. The word says, One praying will save 1,000. Two praying will save 10,000. We have to touch many more. Make every set of 2 people touch 10,000 people. We humble ourselves before you, Lord. We praise your name and give you the glory. We praise your name and give you the glory. We thank you, Father, for just being able to be here this evening in each other's company. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
And to be honest with you guys, I would sit through any sermon that DMX ever did, because listening to him deliver the word of God to me like that, I'd go Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Saturday, though, is the Sabbath. DMX is the true definition of an oxymoron. And I mean that in no disrespect. He just was so religious and so profoundly entrenched in the world of faith, and yet at the same time he lived like such a street gangster and got into a ton of trouble. He was just such an authentically strange individual that we'll never truly understand, but we're left to appreciate the amazing music and just the amazing memory that he left behind and just the love that he showed the people that were around him. But this story is truly wild. It just showcases how deep he was in his addiction issues and how he really was never able to leave his life from the streets behind, even though he achieved superstar levels of fame and celebrity success. He was true to his very core, authentic all the way up until the end when he finally went past the pearly gates into Thug Mansion. Just such a sad story, and when I was doing all my research, it just was very apparent that he really started to fall off after he was released or basically forced out of Def Jam when Jay-Z was president, and that's when his troubles really took a turn for the worse, and he's really kind of spiraled out of control at that point. And originally this just seems like a simple case of a star burning out, finally seeing the last of their glory days. But if you take into account all of the things that we know now about Sean, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, Brother Love Combs, and Jay-Z, aka Sean Carter, then it just makes you wonder, was there something darker at play here to try and force DMX out of the spotlight? Because up until that point, 5 straight #1 releases, and then once Jay-Z gets involved, that 6th album just flops. Something's just, it feels weird, it feels off. And so, though I don't think they necessarily had anything to do with his passing, I think the crickety crack did that. It definitely makes me wonder what role they played in his ultimate spiral out of control. With certain celebrities and certain people, honestly, you don't have to really do much. And kind of similar to the Aaron Carter case, maybe he was just left to spiral out of control on his own because they knew it would eventually take him. And then on top of that, with DMX being compared to Tupac so many times, and then with everything we know about what happened to Tupac, it just made me wonder, did Puffy take out this competition too? Like, he doesn't like competition. He doesn't. So I don't know, you guys, but I want to know what you think, because inevitably you guys always have some stuff that you know that I didn't know. And even more than that, I want to know what you guys think about DMX, because DMX has always been my dog. I listened to him when I was a kid, when I was like 10 to 12 years old. I still listen to him. I still love his music. I love doing all this research. I got to learn a lot about the person that he was, and I just truly appreciate him and everything that he brought to this world. He was such a legendary figure, a legendary rapper, a legendary human being, in my opinion. And it's just a shame that he didn't find the Sunnyside app in time so that he could cut back on his crickety crack use and maybe get a little bit more sober. But if you need some more sobering stories, I'm going to go ahead and link that Aaron Hernandez video right here. Some high quality street entertainment. But if you just want to watch all of my Diddy videos, I've got an entire playlist right here called Diddy Do It, which includes that Kim Porter episode I mentioned before. Otherwise, you should just take YouTube's advice, because they know you better than you know yourself, and you should watch this video right here, because that's what YouTube thinks you should watch. But I appreciate you guys sitting with me for this long, learning about DMX's story, and I look forward to another one next week. But until then, later, sobers.